The ritual begins with pulses of electricity interspersed with a cooing infant. The drums beat slow and everything is drenched in menace. The guitars kick in fuzzy and overwhelming. The opening track, Earth Calling, ascends to a droning reverb, and then take off. How do you classify the 1973 live album Space Ritual by English rockers Hawkwind? Is it a relic of a distant acid-dropping countercultural past? A cosmic joke of pretentious rubbish, as snooty critics have long maintained? An explosion of anger from space barbarians who've finally gone crazy on a never-ending flight to nowhere? Maybe it's all or none of those things, but it's also one of the greatest rock albums of all time. Space Ritual was released at the tail end of the massive societal overhaul lasting from 1964 to 1974. It began as a pacifist hippie dream to erase war, poverty, and racism. 10 years later, harder drugs, revolutionaries, and brutal police crackdowns became part of a Western world gradually spinning out of control. The music scene reflected the increasingly brutal violence at home and in Southeast Asia by turning rougher, heavier, and darker. Peaceful protests and sit-ins gave way to riot police and terrorist bombings. The everybody get along and love your brother music was edged out for the nascent heavy metal and punk rock movements. Hawkwind's sound is often described as space rock. Space rock has the heft of early heavy metal, the synthesized beeps and whooshes of early electronic music, and the complex song structure and length of progressive rock. But Hawkwind was always a unique sound, basically unconfined by genre. They could branch into rock single charts with the cheery Silver Machine, which paid for the Space Ritual tour, sing about supercharged terrorist chaos with Urban Guerrilla, a song about a bomb-throwing anarchist 3 years before the release of Anarchy in the UK, or relax into the murky depths of drug-soaked grey matter with Golden Void. I cannot hear, I cannot see, down the corridor of pain, down the corridor of pain, down the corridor of pain, down the corridor of pain. Dave Brock's guitar drifts between metal fury, soft psychedelic swooshes, and tripped-out fuzziness. On bass is the legendary metal god Lemmy Kilmister. Years before Motorhead, Lemmy's bass takes a hyper-aggressive role that provides the closest thing to a lead guitar the Ritual has. It's a thunderous drone of menace, like the inescapable fate chasing you through the cosmic void. Vocals from Brock and poet Robert Calvert are unskilled yet furiously arresting, like their DIY punk descendants. Simon King's drums have an almost krautrock repetitive simplicity. Nick Turner's saxophone playing on some tracks is an understated rather than bloated addition to the rock crunch. Tying it all together are Dick Mick and Del Detmar's synthesizer soundscapes, wrapping the entire album in a warm blanket of 70s sci-fi electronic vibrations.
I think the name of Hawkwind came from a mixture of partly to do with Michael Moorcock's influence. We all read his books. Part of it was also a habit of farting and spitting.
Nick was always scraping his throat and hawking and doing these really elongated musical farts.
One of the seminal influences on Space Ritual was Michael Moorcock, creator of the ultimate chaotic evil anti-hero Elric of Melniboné. Moorcock performed with and wrote for Hawkwind on the song Sonic Attack, and the album Warrior on the Edge of Time.
Rock music and its myths have always intrigued Moorcock. He's recently performed and recorded with Deep Fix, but it was for his earlier association with Hawkwind that he's better known.
Somebody asked me to go along and see them, and I did go along and see them, and I liked them very much because they seemed to be rather like sort of crazed occupants of a spaceship that have been going for at least 10,000 years.
Moorcock's writings deliberately turned against the bog-standard sci-fi action scientist, who brought dominance of nature, machines, aliens, and other worlds. The stories of Moorcock were much more pessimistic and psychological, such as 1965's Escape from Evening, about a group of post-apocalyptic survivors who escape their daily misery by wandering through a different dimension made of time itself.
Moorcock became editor of New Worlds, then a conventional and ailing British SF magazine, and he transformed it. The term New Wave described a group of young writers who found, during his editorship, an outlet for more experimental fiction. One of them was Brian Aldiss.
What Moorcock did was to bring in a new lot of people who felt differently and who were, above all, I think, interested in the present and in what was happening in England in the 60s.
Founded by disparate groups of younger SF authors in 1962 to 64, this new wave of science fiction was the first breakout from the stultifying remains of the ultra-conservative pulp era that reigned since the mid-1920s. Moorcock noticed that the most forward-looking literary genre was dominated by writers that were strangely backward socially and politically.
Then we found, that the magazines were far more conservative than we imagined them to be. The editors were far more conservative than we imagined them to be, and we went to science fiction conventions, discovered that the readers and the writers were far more conservative than we imagined them to be.
Such reactionary gems include John W. Campbell, the editor of Analog magazine, who claimed that the students at Kent State University deserved to be murdered by National Guardsmen in 1970, and defended the peculiar institution of slavery. Under Moorcock's editorship of UK SF mags such as New Worlds, writers began to produce speculative fiction that focused on future society, politics, religion, philosophy, and sexuality. The theoretical technology took a back seat to exploring the inner space of the human mind, evolution, and what it meant to be human itself. The new spirit is summed up on the Space Ritual's hard-charging second track, Born to Go. We're breaking out of the shell. We're breaking free. We're hatching our dreams into reality. Escape from the increasingly fractious politics that were tearing apart Britain and the US is a frequent theme, but underlying everything was the desire to be unfettered from the chains of hidebound tradition, and truly explore all the potentialities of futurist fiction. Moorcock long described himself as an anarchist and expressed disgust at both left and right traditions of authoritarian corruption.
What do you mean by an anarchist? Do you mean a man with a bomb and a cloak?
I'm a card-carrying anarchist, which is a contradiction in terms. Well, I'm a member of the St. Fagos Anarchist Publishing Group, so you could say that I was a pretty committed anarchist.
But what does anarchy mean in your...
Blowing things up mainly, but...
Though not usually classified as New Wave, some of the earliest inklings of the counterculture were represented in Frank Herbert's Dune. First serialized at the dawn of the hippie era, Dune featured themes of ecology, abuse of religion, and consciousness-expanding drug use. Dune is set in an evil future of emperors, repression, psychic powers, and religious fanaticism that still exerts a massive popular influence through the Warhammer 40k universe. Though Herbert himself was more conservative than much of the New Wave, Dune features an anti-colonialist revolt that destroys an evil empire, bent on monopolizing the natural resources of a subject people. Herbert was excluded from the right-wing relics of classic SF Moorcock dubbed the Starship Stormtroopers. The New Wave was interested in left-leaning politics and activism, but they also attacked the structure of the stories themselves. It played with unique writing styles, fonts, word layouts, and logical progression. Everything was deconstructed and challenged, including the heroic myths about the man of action solving things by using his mighty technological know-how. The New Wave was more likely to explore a navel-gazing pacifist with sexual hang-ups than a hard-boiled space adventurer. John W. Campbell was out, and William S. Burroughs was in. The New Wave sought to turn its gaze inward, analyzing the faults of their own society rather than engaging in ethnographic study of an alien culture. The oddities of human thinking, what defines madness, and the limitations of human perception and cognition were frequent background themes. In a 1962 issue of New Worlds, J.G. Ballard wrote the formative essay on the New Wave, Which Way to Inner Space, that challenged the juvenile quality of most space fiction.
Now, I wasn't interested in interplanetary travel, time travel, outer space. That didn't interest me at all, and I've never written a science fiction set in outer space or millions of years in the future. I wanted a science fiction for the present day.
Ballard claimed the genre would be relegated to anemic limbo without embracing the fringe intellectual side of speculation. After the assault of Born to Go, the ritual settles down with the relaxing three-song mix of Down Through the Night, Lord of Light, and Space is Deep. The floaty synthesizer washes and electric beeps and boops are paired with astral guitar work and probing questions for the soul. The Heat Death of the Universe is a seminal new wave story by Pamela Zoline. Instead of colonization of outer space in a futurist Wild West, Zoline described one woman's psychological reaction to scientific advancement. It's the slow breakdown of a mind trying to find meaning in the world now that she comprehends the eventual oblivion of all matter. Hawkwind's Lord of Light sums up this galactic unity in death. A day shall come, we shall be as one, perhaps to die it has begun, from the realms beyond the sun. Though making no direct reference to Lovecraft, Space Ritual stands as one of the finest examples of cosmic horror in music. Songs like Black Corridor, based on a novel by Moorcock, have lyrics of existential dread about man's ultimate worthlessness compared to the inky black of space. Space does not care. It does not hope. It does not fear. Space is a remorseless, senseless, impersonal fact.
Senseless, impersonal fact. Space is the absence of time and of matter.
Though Ridley Scott's Alien series and Star Wars are often considered opposed to one another stylistically, they both feature similar shots of starships angled to show off the gigantism of man's mighty creations. Neither later trends, nor 2001: A Space Odyssey for that matter, could quite process how utterly tiny and pathetic humans and their flying tin cans really are, compared to the vastness of the cosmos. Again on Black Corridor, Hawkwind stares the existential immensity of the void in the face. Stars occupy minute areas of space. They are clustered a few billion here, a few billion there, as if seeking consolation in numbers. The Space Ritual is about the truth unvarnished by heroic man's ego. Space just doesn't care about us, our wars, our lives, our loves, or any of our failures and achievements. Space is just there.
We were like a fucking black nightmare. We used to lock the doors so people couldn't get out.
Despite all this, Hawkwind was never meant to be an entirely serious band, which set it against the increasingly pretentious progressive rock scene which tried to legitimize rock as a form of art. With its cast of freaked-out space jockeys going mental in a rattling starship, Space Ritual resembles a prototypical version of John Carpenter's comedy film Dark Star, and thus ultimately British sitcom Red Dwarf.
As the days go by, we face the increasing inevitability that we are alone in a godless, uninhabited, hostile and meaningless universe. Still, you've got to laugh, haven't you?
All you can do in the face of oblivion is laugh.
First worrying sign was he'd shaved his head.
Oh my God!
And he looked like a unicorn.
It did.
He had a long horn, but then came his grand entrance in a stocking suit, body stocking suit, you know, all painted in psychedelic colours, on roller skates.
There are even a few lyrics, such as 7 signs rode on 7 stars, 7 ways to find the long-lost bards, 7 days become 7 years, while Pocus laughed in cold, foul jeers, on the tripped-out track 7 by 7 that are reminiscent of the infamous Stonehenge sequence from Spinal Tap.
In ancient times, hundreds of years before the dawn of history, lived an ancient race of people, the Druids.
But Hawkwind were always in on the joke. Part of the Space Ritual is embracing the utter silliness of the past, present, and future of mankind. The absurd is the only constant in the ever-shifting reality of our world. The humor is best shown on the magnificent Sonic Attack, a spoken word track satirizing 1950s-era duck-and-cover education films about nuclear war.
Paul and Patty know this. No matter where they go or what they do, they always try to remember what to do if the atom bomb explodes right then. It's a bomb, duck and cover.
The lyrics written by Moorcock are delivered in startling seriousness by Robert Calvert, ordering the population do not attempt to rescue friends, relatives, loved ones. Think only of yourself.
Survive if they think only of themselves. Do not attempt to rescue friends, relatives, loved ones. You have only a few seconds to escape. Use those seconds sensibly or you will inevitably die. Do not panic. Think only of yourself.
Weapons of mass destruction have never been quite so funny. Sonic Attack's refrain, "Do not panic," would find better purchase later in the decade on the cover of Douglas Adams' famous Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The rougher edge picks back up with the most influential song Hawkwind ever produced, Brainstorm. If anyone has ever evoked psychotic hysteria through music, it's on this neuron-melting track. The guitars speed up to the frantic pace of a man running from the fascist police. Nick Turner's lyrics sound like the desperate ravings of someone trying to tear out of his own skin. This body of mine, I've got to get out of this void, 'cause I don't want to be destroyed, and I don't want to turn android. Brainstorm is a paranoiac detonation of the hippie age with enough speed and anger for any punk or thrash album. It's a profusion of energy and inarticulate emotion that feels like a lightning storm striking the most atavistic parts of your brain. Its warning about turning android or being destroyed and getting out of the place he feels trapped in is remarkably similar to the sense of entrapment felt by rogue detective Deckard in Ridley Scott's 1982 film Blade Runner.
Yeah, sure. It stems from an interest on my part in the problem of differentiating the authentic human being from the reflex machine, which I call an android. Trying to find criteria which would be applicable to actual human life as we know it now. That is, qualities that show up, for example, in the schizoid affective type, which is a flattening of affect, an inappropriate emotion accompanying, ratiocination.
Right.
Where, for me, the word android is a metaphor for people who are physiologically human but psychologically behaving in a non-human way.
Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols cited Brainstorm as one of his earliest musical inspirations. Anyone who's listened to the bitter cries about escaping a desolated Earth, filled with violence and madness, isn't surprised at the confrontational, spiky-haired enfant terrible of punk's most iconoclastic band had taken part in the space ritual. Both bands expressed a frantic desire to escape the ruins of a dying society while laughing all the way. After the Dalek-like vocal shrieking of Sonic Attack, the ritual crashes into the sludgy, bass-heavy time we left this world today. It's not enough to drop out, not enough to turn on. These techno-barbarians want to escape the whole planet before inevitable obliteration. Time we left makes the audience feel as helpless as a cowering victim of a bombing raid, or maybe an entire continent devastated by an Armageddon of sonic weaponry. Doom, terror, and apotheosis through music permeate the entire record. The lost hope, fear of authority, and desire for escape through development of the mind soak every track. Though not as influential as Brainstorm, the greatest track is undoubtedly Master of the Universe. The wall of noise fully envelops the listener and transports him to the depths of a deranged brain. While shrieking guitars claw away at your sanity, pulsing fuzzy bass riffs mesh perfectly with synthesized soundscapes. It's the ultimate cosmic trip. The space ritual was always about a full-on experience that transcended a mere rock show. I am the center of this universe. It's all a figment of my mind in a world that I've designed. The world isn't a hard, scientific fact. It's an artist's creation. The human brain is the paintbrush that created reality around it, giving meaning to the insouciance of the void. Master of the Universe is the ultimate psychedelic fusion of science and religion that rivals the tripped-out Star Voyage sequence of 2001: A Space Odyssey for transcendental art. Interspersing the jams are the most signature elements of the album, its spoken-word interludes. Given an ultra-serious melodramatic flair by Robert Calvert, Earth Calling and 10 Seconds Forever are alternately hilarious and eerie. Amusing because of the total straightforwardness of the delivery, eerie because of the grimdark authoritarian future they describe. They watch you as you walk the street, brain police not far behind, cast sly glances at who you meet, as time we left this world today reminds you. It's a future where you can only be free if you're deranged enough to leave the smoldering ruins of the Earth in a radioactive dust cloud.
All units activated. Countdown terminating.
Countdown complete.
All units functioning. Movement commencing. We have liftoff. We have music. We have Hawkwind.
The album concludes with the haunting electronic waves of Welcome to the Future, which declares welcome to the dehydrated land, welcome to the self-police parade, welcome to the future. A suitably downbeat ending that matched the post-apocalyptic fiction J.G. Ballard and Michael Moorcock had been writing since the early 60s. The new wave was heavily influenced by figures such as R.D. Laing and Michel Foucault, who warned of the unequal power exerted by psychiatrists, who control and force our minds into rigid shapes more beneficial to society than to our own mental well-being. Like the machines in Dune, technology is not something we use to master the universe. It becomes the tool of humanity's domination by the machines themselves. The ritual ends with the haunting, peaceful thrum. Welcome to the Neo-Golden Age. Welcome to the days we've made. We enslaved ourselves by giving computers control over our bodies, minds, and souls. The ritual spoken of in the title refers to the magnificent stage show with lights, colors, and nude dancing girls meant to overwhelm the senses.
It was an amazing show. It was probably one of the best shows ever in rock and roll, in fact, at the height of it. Space Ritual was a great tour, you know.
The Space Ritual was a space journey. Now, you can't get more far out than a space journey. It was very acidic. It was very psychedelic. That was the whole intention, you know. Play on the mind, play on the eyes, play on the ears.
And thank God we got it captured on an album, you know. If you turn that up full, put headphones on, take about 5 tubs of acid, and fucking, you know, heat up some oil and shit, and project it on the wall, you have some idea of it.
It was not just music, it was a sonic attack. An experience to be had and felt and understood, not merely heard. Art was being used not just to express feelings and ideas, but as a transformative event, something to hold within the audience's subconscious and make our dreams freer and bigger. The ritual in its era passed into legend as sci-fi and rock moved into new territories, undreamed of by the new wave and its flower children. By 1977, the literary world was already announcing the death of the new wave. The me generation of the later 70s had long since killed off the rebellious challenge-everything ethos of the previous 15 years. Barely 2 decades after the inception of the first taboo-breaking and tradition-destroying shift in sci-fi since the 1920s, it was already being replaced. The next wave would be called Cyberpunk. At first glance, it had little to do with the era preceding it, but the punks resisting the corporatocracy while wondering how to stay human in an increasingly robotic world wouldn't exist without the new wave. The definitive cyberpunk film Blade Runner, mentioned above when speaking about Brainstorm, was based on the novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. Dick's stories are much more at home in the mind-gazing, inner-space-devoted psychedelia of the new wave than the gritty, tech-obsessed cyberpunk. He also began to wonder about how to avoid turning into an android, his term for a robotic human without any feelings or empathy, which is something that often comes up on the Space Ritual. He believed he was possessed by the biblical prophet Elijah and was being secretly stalked by agents of the Neo-Roman Empire in modern-day America. It was a paranoia continually expressed by Hawkwind that became intrinsic to the intercorporate conspiracies, so much a part of the DNA of cyberpunk. The connection was not only there, it's impossible to imagine cyberpunk without the new wave breaking open the doors of perception before it. Another curious link is Michael Moorcock's introduction to modern science fiction in the late 1950s.
And I actually bought my first ever modern science fiction book in here. So that sort of made me interested in I wasn't interested. Yeah, it was. I do. It's still the best science fiction book I ever read. Stars My Destination by Alfred Bester.
The Stars My Destination, the Alfred Bester novel he's referring to, has been retroactively seen as the very first prototypical cyberpunk novel. Even though it was released in the late 1950s, a good 20 years before the genre was even in its infancy, it possessed all of the curious elements of cyberpunk, high-tech and low-life. Just like in some ways Hawkwind were a low-life group of people, buskers, travelers.
And in walked this bunch of reprobates, is all I can call them, because they certainly weren't like anybody else. They definitely stood out as travelers, and they said, "Give us a go."
People that were sort of scruffy and on the margins of society, and yet also curiously interacting with the most advanced scientific advances then available. The main character of The Star's My Destination is deliberately said to be part of the gutter class of society at the very lowest, with no education, speaking roughly and crudely, and yet also managing to be a fulcrum in the intercorporate intrigues that are tearing apart the mega-wealthy that control the far future. It's probably not a coincidence that Moorcock later became involved with a band of space barbarians trying to survive in the high-tech urban ruins of the modern Western world. Oddly enough, the last moment of this era of psychedelic mind-gazing was an adaptation of the earliest example of countercultural sci-fi. 1984's Dune was hated by a new generation of critics and audiences who were accustomed to the Star Wars films. A franchise, ironically enough, of modern updates to the very pulp magazine sci-fi the New Wave sought to kill. Dune was filled with the concerns of the New Wave, such as the next stage of human evolution, repressive social systems with the inevitable revolution, machine dominance over mankind, and trippy set pieces like the Guild Navigator folding space. It was a cerebral movie masquerading as an actioner, and moviegoers refused to take part in the ritualized experience. Dune was directed by none other than David Lynch. He is often considered an odd, inappropriate choice to adapt that novel. Yet Lynch has shown how interested he is in the inner depths of the mind through transcendental meditation, even showing his hero Dale Cooper swimming the inner purple seas of consciousness.
You sit in a chair comfortably, you close your eyes, you start a mantra, and you go within. It's so beautiful to dive within, and it's diving into the big self.
Oddly enough, Lynch even introduced elements of sonic weaponry to the story, not present in the original novel. After the movie bombed with audiences and critics, another era of sci-fi was over, to be replaced by pulp space opera in one direction and Ridley Scott-influenced gritty realist sci-fi in the other. Science fiction briefly experimented with tossing off all moorings of structure, style, content, and rules, and blasted off to the outer depths of space or the inner depths of the human mind. But perhaps the ultimate destination of ruin and doom was predestined by the genre's inherent fatalism. Audiences are going to tire of neurotic introspection and philosophy eventually. After the age of the ritual, the genre fell on a dull shelf of land, filled with repackaged adolescent twaddle, rigidly obeying whatever machine-driven formula claimed would produce the most money. But we should never forget the time when sci-fi abandoned the dead ideas of a past age to drift free of all restraint, convention, order, and boundaries on the slippery seas of consciousness. As it's put on The Awakening, we touched upon a shelf of rock, selected by the auto-mind, and left a galaxy of dreams behind.
Though eternity lies before thee, thy work in the land of the living is not done. Return, brave ones.
And watch more videos.